And welcome you again. Again, my name is Susan McGuire. I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar with Cathi Hight. Cathi will explore developments in chamber dues structures and trends with a focus on the influences identified in the Horizon Initiative Chambers 2025 that will shape chambers and the regions. This webinar will also provide you with a preview of portions of Cathi's longer ACCE course on the same subject, also entitled Next Generation Dues Trends. Cathi Hight is a Kaizen consultant and president of Hight Performance Group. Considered as the membership guru and the developer of the Member Retention Kit, Cathi helps associations meet the expectations of their members. She provides realignment strategies that help associations of all sizes manage constant change, deliver benefits that members value, leverage volunteer and staff resources efficiently, and effectively communicate the value of membership. Cathi has diverse career experience, which includes being VP of Operations for the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii, Regional Sales and Marketing Manager for both Dole Foods and Dean Foods, National Manager for the Kauffman Foundation's Fast Track Entrepreneurship Training Program, and a Motorola University instructor for cycle time reduction and benchmarking. Cathi is a member of ACCE and has been a national trainer for ACCE for membership development, as well as an instructor for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Institute for Organization Management. She's presented at numerous association and chamber conferences, including the Great Ideas event for SAE and the ACC convention. With that, welcome again, Cathi, and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan, and it's exciting to see how many people were obviously piqued by the topic and signed up, and so I'm excited about that. And we just want to walk you through some excerpts from the course that, as Susan mentioned, is a longer version of the course. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slides, and I thank Susan very much for the introduction. I also have a new book that just got wrapped up yesterday, and it's called A New Approach to Tiered Membership. I think you're going to start to see some similarities in terms of the things that we're talking about today and where we're going in this world of membership. And I want to share with you again, like I said, some excerpts from the course, and hopefully it'll pique your interest to really want to dive in and learn a little bit more. So the course that we talked about a couple of years ago, you know, what I find interesting is how much it really parallels in terms of the Horizon initiatives that all of you guys had a chance to get a peek of at the convention. Hopefully you've been reading about, and I think there's this correlation between what we're seeing in terms of dramatic shifts in the landscape and how that's impacting membership. So in the course, we certainly talk about trends and how trends are really challenging the relevance or the essentialism of the way that we operate and how we structure our dues models. And then think about how associations in general are really being impacted by trends. So we're going to talk about that here in just a minute, because chambers, of course, being part of the association world, the kinds of things that we're seeing in terms of trends that are impacting our members are certainly impacting all of us. And then, of course, we also talked about some strategies, some different ways to evaluate the model that we currently have and to transition to a new dues model that might resonate better with today's members. I want to share with you what the course agenda was. And one thing that I don't know how many of you have actually participated in the course itself. It's actually done through a Prezi format. And so the slides that I'm showing you today are done from PowerPoint, a little bit different, but certainly easier for today's webinar. So you're going to get kind of a snippet of some of the static slides, but certainly know in the Prezi model, it certainly looks a little bit different. But we had 3 modules in the course, and we're going to touch a little bit on each of these today. So the first module is realizing that it really is a whole new world for chambers, because certainly there are a lot of shifts going on. We can parallel that. I'll talk about that in terms of the Horizons initiatives and how that correlates. And there are a lot of associations that are certainly fighting for membership and model that they've come to know and attracting and retaining members today. And then some of the challenges around current dues models, the models we've been using for a long time, what are the pros and cons around those models. And then in Module 2, we start talking about emerging dues trends and the fact that over the last 10 years, we've started to see some real changes in terms of what dues models looks like. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that today as well. We talk about the member profile matrix. We'll touch on that today. The 5 mega trends that are really shaping what dues models looks like. And then we do a deep dive in terms of looking at some different ways that we can use those trends and how that's affecting the models that we're seeing being developed. And then the third module was really getting into the details about how do you go about refining the model that you have or redesigning to really create a brand new model that's really different than the one that you have, and the kinds of factors you have to think about, some steps for conducting a review of that model, and then if you are going to be moving to a new model, some techniques that seem to have been proven in terms of what's going to make that transition a lot smoother for you and your members. So in terms of Module 1, and talking about the fact that it is a whole new world for chambers, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the reasons why and looking at the shifts in the landscape. So certainly one of those shifts is around social media. I think a lot of people thought that was a fad, but the reality is social media in some form or fashion is definitely here to stay. Started, of course, through the millennials. Millennials, as you know, born between 1981 and 1995. Some demographers will take that up to the year 2000, depending who you talk to. And the fact that MySpace, you know, which was really sort of for a younger crowd, then morphed into a lot of the social media that we see today, Facebook and LinkedIn, and certainly though it's going to continue, and there'll be a lot of other platforms. So whether or not the dominant ones are here 5 to 10 years from now, one thing we do know is that social media is here to stay. And that's really changed the way that people are educated and entertained and how they engage. And this whole idea about virtual communities and how we don't necessarily have to come face to face anymore. And as we think about, you know, the nature of belonging and gathering, which is really the #1 priority or shift in the Horizons initiative, something for us to really think about in terms of what does it mean to come together and to engage with one another. Another huge shift is recognizing that 85% of how we engage on the internet is through a handheld device, and that everything we do is really in the cloud. We don't own software anymore. That certainly made a big shift in terms of small businesses, and having worked for the Kauffman Foundation, it's fascinating to see how small businesses today can really compete in a whole different way just because of technology, and realizing that technology is a huge driver in changing how people do business, how customers engage, and certainly how we need to interact with whoever our customers are. And certainly the recession played a big impact. I think all of us felt that. I remember my parents talking a whole lot about you know, the whole Great Depression, and something I couldn't relate to because I hadn't been born then, but certainly I think most of us can certainly talk about the Great Recession and certainly what that was like, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's impacted associations, but that has really made a huge difference, not just with Americans, but certainly with people all over the world. And part of that certainly is because this whole influence of globalness, and the reality is that we're not a standalone economy. We're really an independent, an interdependent economy that's really laced with what's going on in the world. And so the whole global impacts and what that brings to the equation is certainly something for us to think about, and certainly impacting your members, and certainly something we have to consider as well, because we've always been focused locally as chambers, and the reality is that shift really is we need to be paying attention globally and helping our members to do that as well. And the fact that we have 4 generations as members, and we talk a lot about the millennials, but the reality is we're really serving a very diverse membership that crosses lots of generational spans, and there's certainly been some changes around that as well. I think one of the first books that really shook up the whole association industry was Race for Relevance, which came out in 2011, then followed in 2013 with Road for Relevance. And if you haven't read the first book, I think the second book does a really great synopsis on that first book, but then sort of talks about strategies and things that we need to be paying attention to. I was amazed at how many chambers in my Institute classes had not read this book or the second one, and yet pretty much all the association people have. So if it's not something that you've looked at, you definitely want to consider that, because I think a lot of the things that you see in the Horizons Initiative that has to do with nature of belonging and gathering are really, really going to resonate with you as you read the book. And the Race for Relevance talked about the impact of the recession and the recovery period on membership. You know, the fact that people lost money, they lost jobs, and that it had this huge ripple effect, and that it's really made people a little bit more price sensitive, ROI sensitive in terms of what do I get for membership? How many different associations could I belong to? Where are the overlaps? And so people that might have belonged to 6 associations, now find themselves really paring that down to maybe 1 or 2, and then the question is, where should we invest our dollars? The demographics, we talked about the millennials. I know sometimes it's like we over talk about them, but I think the significance of the millennials, certainly is realizing that they represent 51% of the workforce now, and they'll represent 75% of the workforce in just 10 years. And right now we've got 18,000 boomers exiting the workforce every day. And the book talks about how, associations were really built on the baby boomer generation, and we're the ones who were the volunteers, the drivers, and the ones who gave the money. There are over 1.6 million 501c3s in the entire U.S. and about 90,000 501c6s, which are membership organizations. And the fact that you have to realize that the majority of those were created after 1960 means we have a lot of competition. And all of these were being driven by the boomers. Millennials didn't grow up with associations. They grew up with Facebook and LinkedIn. And so this whole idea that they're going to be the ones making the decisions, running companies, being the decision maker that says yes or no to membership is something we have to pay attention to. And it's because there are 81 million of them compared to 46 million Gen Xers, makes you realize who's really going to be deciding on whether or not they're going to join the chamber. And when we think about nature of belonging and gathering and thinking about the millennial generation, and that we can't relegate them to the Thanksgiving kids table anymore. They need to be integrated into our membership, and we have to realize that they are a force to be reckoned with. So it's not something that we can just look at them as being the bar hoppers, but realizing the guy who started Dropbox was 27 years old. You're going to hit him up for a chamber membership, then you really need to understand how they view us and what's important to them. And the book also talks a lot about technology and how associations lag behind technology, and that our customers, our members, especially the millennials, are much more tech savvy than we are. And it doesn't look good that we lag behind, that we have old software, and that we don't really leverage social media and all the different ways that they like to engage. And so that's really made us sort of look at our associations, chambers included, to really think about how are we going to leverage technology to really deliver benefits in a whole different way, and realizing that if 85% of people are accessing a mobile device to do everything, then are we ready to serve a mobile generation as well? Interesting, I love the fact the book talked about time poverty, because everyone you talk to says, I don't have time to come to events, I don't have time to volunteer or engage, and realizing that associations were really built on a volunteer model, and chambers are no different from that. And if everybody is really busy, and the fact that we work 500 more hours a year than we did 30 years ago, and that 30 years ago, 5% of women worked outside the home, and now that number is close to 90%. We have to realize that everybody is super, super busy. And when people are busy and they don't have a lot of money, then ROI certainly goes up in terms of expectations. And then people start to really ask themselves, can I really come to everything that you're offering? And what else are you doing for me if I can't engage? What can I access online? Sort of starts to really make them question membership and ask, and the same questions for us in terms of how do we serve this whole new membership, which is so different than it was 10 years ago. So board size being reduced, and we talk a lot about that also in the Horizons Initiative, and the fact that the expectations around boards are changing, and that everybody's not going to come to everything anymore. They still will, but it just may not be the same as it's been in the past. So just some things for us to think about, and we talk a lot more about other trends as we get into the course. One of the things that we really talk a lot about in terms of today's members and where things are going, the matrix probably not new to you. It was also featured in the Horizons Initiative. Was really created from the board of directors from the Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, who sat down and realized that we really do serve 4 different kinds of members. So the concept of, you know, membership being one size for everyone, that everyone's going to support our mission and fund that mission, has changed. And one thing that we realize is that we have 4 diverse, what I call psychographics of membership, which means that our members are driven by different values, interests, and needs, and that we have to think about that and know who we're talking to. And so in this matrix, they talk about 2 different types of members who are community-minded. They're on the top, and they join the chamber because they want to get something done through us because of our clout, our credibility, our partnerships, our access. And I'll tell you that access is the chamber's greatest asset, and part of that is really understanding how we leverage that access. So community investors are totally invested with us. They support our mission. These are the mission funders. They're really investing in our long-term initiatives around transportation, education, workforce development, advocacy, which is really what we do around those things, economic development, making sure that it's going to be a thriving economy 10 years from now. And they invest in us so that all businesses thrive and do well. They don't necessarily expect a direct ROI for that membership, and they really are our long-term mission supporters, which is great. But one thing you have to realize is that this is a shrinking part of our base. It used to be, you know, the 80% of people who join the chamber were really community investors, but that really has shifted. In fact, if you look at the top, they probably represent about 20%, maybe 30% if you're lucky, of your entire membership. So community builders, very similar in terms of big issues. I think what's different about community builders is they still have to validate that check. And it's really about us helping them to execute on their corporate initiatives, helping them be seen as a strong market leader, having that leadership types of opportunities to tell their story and being recognized as those leaders. So think about those people as really craving market position. There's a reason why they're in their community, and they want to make sure the chamber can actually help them accomplish the things that they need to do. They're on the involved side, though, because they do provide sponsorships, volunteers. They do get involved with our organization rather than just writing the checks, so the kinds of resources they can bring to us certainly are very valuable. And the 2 tiers, or the 2 quadrants on the bottom, these typically are small businesses, but if you think about it, it represents 80% of our membership, and they want to get something for their business. So it's great that we're working on all the big picture stuff, but really what they want are some things that are directly for their business, and they don't necessarily have a lot of investments to work with. Business investors on the left-hand side, and I truly think that this is probably our most underserved audience in our membership. These business investors are too busy running their business to probably really come to everything, but expect to get that ROI for being a member, and what they're looking for are the pay-to-play, in other words, you know, willing to advertise, willing to participate, as long as it's strategic and it really drives their bottom line. And the kinds of opportunities they're looking for have to do with helping to grow their business. Business builders by far represents the largest segment of our membership. Small businesses really looking more for what I call transactional kinds of activities. I show up at a business after hours, I expect to leave with 5 leads. That just-in-time marketing, showing up to everything they can that's free or close to it by being able to market their brand in person, and that's what they do. And really what they're doing is increasing their social capital, whether they're reps from companies, new businesses, new people to town looking for those opportunities to really have that access that the chamber can provide. And so knowing that and using this as framework really makes us really think about our programming, thinks about our benefits and our models and our messaging around why join and what's in it for you. In Module 2, we start talking about the 5 mega dues trends, and this really came about in another book that came out the same time as Race for Relevance by Sarah Sladek, who used to work at the Minneapolis Chamber and is the end of membership as we know it. And even though the majority of her book really focuses on appealing to millennials and how associations really need to make that shift and recognize that these are your future members. And how do we prepare for them? One of the things I didn't say that I loved about Race for Relevance, and probably the best quote in the book by far to me, was it saying, design your association not for your current majority, but for the emerging majority, and that's who Sarah Sladek is talking about. But she has a chapter in her book that I found really fascinating around dues trends, and in the course itself, we actually dive into these 5 as well as 11 additional emerging dues trends, but these 5 are probably the ones that we're really seeing show up and make a difference in terms of what models look like today. And first of all, it starts with the ability to customize a membership. More and more members don't want a canned membership. They want to be able to have some way to customize that membership so that it really matters to them. This is a real challenge, I think, for associations in general, and certainly chambers. We're not used to offering something that's customizable, but this is where our market is going. And you can thank Starbucks for that, because they really helped us to realize that we don't have to have coffee one way. Well, once we started that, we now have a generation, a whole culture of people who believe that they should have choices and they should be able to customize what they get. Electronic or virtual membership is happening a lot in the association space, but I think we're probably going to start to see that in the chamber space as well. And this is really for a number of reasons. I think electronic and international are very, very closely related, because what it's saying is there's not necessarily a geographic boundary. People oftentimes want to access whatever they can, via their mobile device. So whether it's the directory or webcasts or forums or online conferences, that more and more people, who don't want to come to things or don't have time to come to things, are going to start to look for benefits that they can access 24/7 on their own terms, and whether or not we're really prepared to do that. The multi-tier we've seen in the association world for almost 20 years, and probably about 10 years in the chamber world. So this concept of tiers and packages and really creating a menu of benefits and then letting members choose which set of benefits really resonate the best for them, both either by budget or because of what we're offering, I think has become sort of the more prevalent model. But one thing you're going to realize about these mega trends is that they're not independent of each other. You're going to see all of these show up in the models. And one thing we do in the course is we take a look at some different examples of dues models, many of them coming out of the association world. I do believe that associations are more innovative because their membership is so dispersed. They're not necessarily geographically centered, and so they do have to serve their membership in a very different way and leverage technology probably a little bit better than we do. So you're going to see a lot of those examples coming from the association side, and we do look at them in terms of how these different trends are really showing up in the models. And then the open freemium level, I know kind of scares chambers, but the reality is, there are a lot of things out there that are free, and free means more market share, getting a chance to have permission marketing where we can actually tell people what we do and what we offer and get them on our mailing list. We don't have to offer them very much. However, what we do have to do is realize that maybe this entry level of membership is really about marketing, getting more people on the playground, because Facebook, for instance, doesn't charge for membership. But who doesn't want to be an advertiser when there's a billion people in the playground, right? And so this concept of open freemium, I think we're going to start to see play out, because more and more so it's about getting them in, making our revenue from other sources, and then think about how we upsell people in terms of services. just want to show you a couple examples in terms of how associations and chambers are really kind of adopting to these trends. First of all, I want to kind of show you, and I know you all have YP programs, and some of them are great, and maybe some not so much. I like Milwaukee. I like the fact that they have a name called Fuel Milwaukee. It doesn't say YP on it, because I think one of the things that I'm realizing about young professionals or millennials is that they don't want to be called that. You know, they don't see themselves as being labeled that way. They want to be part of something that sounds exciting, that really is that sense of belonging, as we're talking about in the Horizons Initiative. The fact that they're very into collaboration and teams and focused around causes. And so what I like about how Milwaukee's doing this is the name, but also it's the language. It's really kind of focusing in on what's important to them, you know, connect you to professional peers, not, you know, bar hopping kinds of people. But the language, I think, is good. The emphasis, it's just clever. I think it's done well. And if this is really going to be our audience for the future, then we have to think about how do we develop something that really resonates with them. I'm showing you a association model, and this is an individual membership rather than a company membership. But I think what's fascinating about this is the fact that, you know, you do have that opportunity to have customization, the add-ons. You see over on the left-hand side special interest groups, so choose your group as part of your membership. So again, employing that customization. And the fact that, you know, when you think about belonging and gathering, it's about who do I want to hang with? I want to hang with my peers, and my peers are people who care about the same things, have the same interests. So providing that opportunity for people to self-select, I think, is really cool. And then if you look at their membership categories and the fact they have retired and unemployed, so for that transitional member, whether they're a student and offering a lifetime membership with limited benefits, this is a great example of how all these different trends are coming together and being built into a membership model. And we do talk about several others in the course. And the whole idea is, you know, not to say, well, that's an association, that won't work for me, but to really have you think creatively about, so how do I employ those different trends into the model that I'm creating so that it does have that sense of inclusion and diversity, and that we're welcoming to maybe different audiences that we wouldn't normally be attracting. And so I think that's really the message behind that. And then in Module 3, we start to get into a whole lot more, which is really about refining, redesigning your dues model. What are the steps that we would have to go through? What are the challenges? How do we get our board on board of this? And then looking at all kinds of challenges around staff, you know, adoption. You know, one thing I realized in working with a lot of chamber people is that we don't change as readily as we should. And one thing that's interesting when you think about entrepreneurs is the fact that they will change on a dime, because if they don't, they won't be in business, you know, by the end of the week. And sometimes I think that in our industry, we don't change as quickly. We're reluctant, and sometimes the people that we have to fight are internal, you know, whether it's our board or it's our staff, and just realizing that we're really here for the members. And it's really about listening and understanding what our members' needs and challenges are, and then how do we provide the benefits, the right set of benefits, the right mediums for them to engage with us that really, really help them address those challenges. I don't think we're in the business of solving everyone's problems, but I do think we can be in the business of creating opportunities where people can address their own problems and find their solutions, probably more from peer to peer. And millennials love that. Millennials love this idea about collaborating on problems and finding solutions together, and not this go figure it out by yourself, but really come to the table, join the conversation, and really get involved. But realizing that what they're interested in and what they want to get involved in might be a little bit different than the things that we're working on. And I think what you're going to find as you go through the course because I think once you change one thing, it kind of starts this ripple effect, and you have to start to change other things, like your programming, like the way that you operate and do things. And so that's going to result in some changes internally, especially as you try to adapt to the external needs. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you about the course. There's a lot more. You're getting just snippets of it. I hope it's something that you're wanting to take a deep dive in. But right now, I think maybe we should kind of entertain some questions and see what people are wondering, want to know. Did I spark a plug? You know, just a little ignite somewhere where you're saying, what about this? So I think, Susan, we should just ask our audience, and we have a lot of people on the call, to really see what their burning questions are and what their comments might be, and how this relates to the Horizon initiatives and where we're going as an industry.
Okay, well, thank you, Cathi. And yes, we do want your questions, and Cathy's happy to talk with you more about, in response to your questions or comments. To ask questions in this webinar format, what you need to do is type them into the question box. I will see them, and I will read them to Cathi. And as I said before, if we run out of time or you'd rather contact her individually, that's totally okay too. But let me see what we have here. Okay, Cathi, first question is, do you have any examples of a chamber using a custom-built membership?
Yes. In fact, you know, several chambers that I've been working with for the last couple of years have been trying that out. And you know, I guess you have to be a little careful, certainly, about how much customization you allow. You know, if it's a top investor and they want to do, you know, like a one ask and have everything included, there's certainly that opportunity for people who want to customize it that way. But I have seen a few chambers who are playing with that idea about within a membership tier, for instance, having the option. So there was one chamber, for instance, that, you know, had a YP annual networking pass versus a networking pass for a women's group, or, you know, business after hours. Pick one of the three. Now, do you have to track that and manage that internally? And again, yes, but at the same time, I don't think we can get too caught up on how we're going to do it. I think the first thing we have to decide is, do we want to do it? And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So customization options within a tier to give people a choice. And again, you know, asking yourself how many choices, because the more choices you offer, the more you have to manage. But I love the concept of doing that. And yes, there are a few chambers who are trying that on for size. So we'll see how that goes for them. But, you know, I applaud them for being willing to try this idea about customization within a tier, and how can we do that.
Okay. Here's a great question. How can you get your board to adapt to a change in the membership model?
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing that I have found is at any time you're trying to change a membership model, I like to work with a task force, and I always encourage the chamber staff to make sure that they recruit, you know, 2 or 3 people from the board, maybe who might be a little diverse in terms of size, industry, length of time as a member, to participate, because I think when they're involved that way and they get to hear all the different perspectives, they oftentimes become your champion back to the rest of the board, because now they're on board themselves. So I probably wouldn't try to initiate a change without having some board members involved in the process, because you're going to need that. That's a whole stakeholder group. And then certainly, I guess, when you're going to be moving into a new model, you certainly want to work with the board first and get them converted, if you will, because if they don't walk the talk, it's kind of hard for other people to follow, knowing that the board's not necessarily on board themselves.
Okay, and there's 2 related questions here. What are some of the initial questions we should ask in redesigning our dues model? And then what immediate pitfalls or financial impact should we be looking out for?
Okay, so read me the first question again.
What are some of the initial questions we should ask in redesigning our dues model?
You know, like the approach that I always have, it's always more customer driven in terms of, bringing together groups of members and having them give you feedback about the model and the benefits, because I think that they tend to ask more of the right questions and really listening to what they're saying. One thing that I think you can always start off doing is sort of looking at your membership feedback mechanisms now. So if you do a survey, if you've done any kind of program evaluation, and you look at engagement and what people are gravitating towards, which things are people using, not using, where are you on the life cycle in terms of what you offer, because some things have been around for 20 or 30 years, and you might see the engagement with those activities kind of waning. So one, it's kind of looking at who your base is now, talking with them, looking at what they're utilizing, what they're not utilizing. But I like to just bring them together. I always try to bring together a group of about 20 to 25 members that really represent those quadrants that we were looking at, and really facilitate that conversation with them, because they will tell you a lot of what you need to know. I think sometimes the questions that we ask from staff are really different than the kinds of questions we end up answering that come from our members. So I would make it more of a member approach. And your second question talked about financial impacts, right?
Pitfalls and financial impact, yes.
Yeah. There's certainly, I guess, all kinds of pitfalls. I think the one that people always worry about is whether or not larger companies are going to choose tiers or something on our dues model that's inexpensive. I think that's really related to value. We haven't done a really good job in terms of sitting down, talking about value, and are really aligning what their interests are and making sure that we have that one-to-one sell. And we do talk about some different techniques in terms of converting people to a new model in the course. But certainly, if you're going to be talking about people that you're worried about who are going to invest down, realizing that's probably about 20% of your membership, those should probably be one-on-one conversations, because I think that's really where the financial pitfall is. Everybody worries about people investing down. Nobody ever worries about somebody investing in a higher level, like a small business deciding to take a $10,000 spot is not something we really worry about. So I think those kinds of pitfalls in terms of how we roll it out, when our billing cycle is, how do we approach it, I mean, those are all pitfalls. But what I usually recommend is you make a list of all the challenges you think you're going to face, and then you really sit down and ask yourself, how are you going to address those? What strategies are you going to use? And I think, the planning is really important, because proper planning prevents poor performance, right? I'll skip the other P that goes in there, but it's really making sure that you think about all the things that might happen, and you have a plan on how you're going to deal with that beforehand. So you don't just roll it out and then see what happens later. You really plan for the things that you worry about, and you mitigate them before they happen.
Okay. Cathi, is there a specific model you're seeing used more with chambers who have budgets under $500,000?
Yes, and probably in the sense of, if you look at the matrix and really designing one tier per different type of member. So in other words, maybe kind of working from a more simple design rather than a complex design. Because if you also have a small budget, you may also have a small staff. So I think that's things that people have to think about, because you have to manage the process internally. So think about what you want to offer, what those levels are. But I've seen chambers that are really small and have a budget, just if you're talking about under $500,000, actually do very well with their model. It's different, and yet it's not so different. I think when you're a small chamber, I think it's easier. I think when you become when you're a large chamber and you create a more complex model, then I think that's a little more challenging. I think as a small chamber, you can design it more simply, because you're working with a smaller base of members, a lot more commonalities. Your price points, I think you know them really well. and it's not going to be as difficult as you think. And I think a small chamber, or any chamber that really has a lot of small business members, has a lot to gain, because if you think about where the majority of your members are paying right now, the fact that you can offer a package that has some attractive benefits and get people to move from paying you $250 to $500, I think is pretty cool. You know, there's so much more you can do. So if you're a small chamber, don't shy away from it.
Okay. Cathi, are you seeing a push for freemium membership models just in the last 2 years? And do you think this is only a playing field for rural chambers?
Oh no, I don't think it's something so much for a rural chamber. I actually think the advantage is really for a metro chamber, because metro chambers have such a small market share, you know, anywhere from, you know, 5% to 15% market share. So when you're in a metro area and you have a lot more competition, I think that's when it makes more sense to kind of have people come in the door at a real nominal level or next to nothing with very simple benefits, and just have the permission to market to them. But it's not as prevalent as you would think it would be. I think we see that more in the association space, where they're willing to do trial memberships or discounted memberships. Even like with ASAE, I remember they offered me, you know, a $195 membership, and the regular price is $495, and they did that for a year, so I could try it, and it worked. I stayed, right? So so kind of playing in that space. And of course, you know, when we do the deep dive into the course, we talk about some of the other trends that are showing up, not just freemium, but monthly, you know, opt out, opt in. So, and I think that's really what the Glenwood Springs did with their freemium model. They really did an opt out. So you're automatically a member at a really basic level until you opt out, right? So lots of different ways that you can play with that theme, but I don't necessarily think the advantage is for a rural chamber at all.
Okay. The question about charging charities for membership. Charge or don't charge for charities?
Yeah, you know, good point. And it's always a discussion. I think I hear that a lot in the chamber space in terms of nonprofits, you know, asking for a discount. But sometimes you're right. It depends on what kind of nonprofit are they? Because if they're a credit union or a hospital, they're still a nonprofit, but they certainly have the ability to pay. There are some chambers who do have a nonprofit rate, and it's restricted to 501c3 or charity specific, so that hospitals and credit unions aren't included. I worked with another chamber that actually used to have multiple nonprofit tiers, which was very confusing. So in other words, for every tier they had a nonprofit version. So they had 10 tiers. They had 5 regular and 5 matching nonprofit ones, and they just converted to 5 tiers, and nonprofits getting, I think it's a 15% discount on any tier, but they still charge them because we're a nonprofit too, right? So that's that's a really hard one. I think if you want to offer a category that's just for charity, personally, I don't think I would market it. It wouldn't be on my rack card or on my tier sheet, and I think I would just deal with that on an exception basis rather than publicize it.
Okay. This is a question from a chamber member who says their chamber does not have an automatic increase in dues on a yearly basis, as some chambers do. What is your opinion on this?
I don't think you have to have one that's every year, but I know that there's a problem if you don't have one on some type of regular basis. I'm working with one kind of / economic development chamber organization. They haven't had a dues increase in 12 years, and now they're trying to do it through their tiered model, and it's sticker shock, you know, for their members. So it can certainly be a detriment not to have an increase, but I don't necessarily believe that you have to have an increase every single year. I think it has a lot to do with your pricing, what your costs are, but probably having some type of adjustment anywhere from 1 to 3 years, I think makes pretty good sense, because the cost of doing business is higher. So that's, I guess, what I would share about that. Now, one thing that there are studies that have shown that if you try to do a price increase, especially on your base price that's higher than 15% in any 1 year, then the drop rate goes up considerably. So there is a threshold in which you can make that adjustment. And I think most chambers try to opt for 3 to 5% increase, so they would be way below that threshold. But that's probably better than waiting and doing one big increase and then risking the drops.
Okay. Here's a really interesting question. What does a chamber do when they're torn between a seasoned older boomer membership base that's beginning to fade away but still formidable, and a younger Generation Xer and millennial group that are on the sidelines for the most part, and a smaller group, yet they are the wave of the future? How do you address both of those groups at the same time?
Yeah, well, I would definitely work on integrating those groups. You know, millennials really don't have a problem working with boomers or Xers. They just want a seat at the table, and so I think there's a way for us to really integrate them on committees and councils. Perhaps even start to look for opportunities to really have a co-chair or someone coming in as chair that does represent one of those other groups, because at some point, you know, if you don't integrate them, they're just going to assume that you're not including them. You don't really want them there. I think, you know, making sure that they're there on programming committees, and again, giving you the feedback, so be able to try something new. So maybe the way to kind of look at it is, yes, you've got this great boomer group, but you probably start to have to envision, you have to start to kind of integrate or think about 20 or 30% of the changes really being directed towards an emerging majority, so that you know, over time, maybe in the next 5 years, it's going to look totally different, especially as your boomers continue to exit. But I think looking at programming, looking for opportunities, and making sure that there really is something for everyone, and finding opportunities to bring more and more of those people together rather than looking at keeping them separate.
Okay. How long should it take to roll out a change to your due schedule?
I think what we find is that you can probably plan anywhere from probably, you know, 18 months to 3 years for full conversion, only because a lot of chambers are on an anniversary basis. So, you know what's great about that is you can roll it out anytime, but no matter when you roll it out, you're going to have people who just renewed, and so they may or may not want to convert to that new model when it comes out, but it's really going to be in that next cycle. And you always have people who are going to be in between and not really willing to make that shift right away. And so because of the exceptions that we make and the billing cycles, I think you're probably looking at 18 months on the short end, and it could be as long as 3 years to get full conversion, depending on how many exceptions you've made.
Okay. Cathi, could you talk a little bit about the importance of fulfillment tracking when chambers expand their investment options?
Yeah, I know it's a whole nother space, I think, that we're starting to get into, and I know that, you know, WebLink and Chamber Master certainly are set up to be able to change what our dues options look like. I think the concern has more to do with, like you said, tracking the benefits, whether or not they've been used. If people are registering for something and they're entitled to something, how do you make sure that they get it? What happens if they don't use it? So I think part of that is really making that shift internally, and we may have to really, you know, push hard on our providers, who are our database providers, to make sure that they're going to be moving with the times too, because as we change, they're going to have to change. So I know that that's still a little bit of a challenge, but I think we just have to figure out internally how we're going to do that. And make sure that our providers are coming up with those solutions as well. But from what I've seen so far, at least both of the most popular database providers are set up to be able to make those shifts in membership. The hard part, though, is when you're in transition, you're going to have some of the people that are in the old way of doing things, and then you're going to have people who are on the new. And so there is going to be that transition and a little bit of headache time. I don't think we've worked out all the details to that because more and more chambers are converting their models, and I don't think our systems have necessarily caught up with it.
Okay. Do you have a database provider that you recommend for a chamber?
I'm just going to leave it with, I think that WebLink and ChamberMaster are still the two most popular ones in our industry. I think, though, that what's going to happen probably over the next 5 years is, and I've been saying this for a while, I just haven't quite seen it yet, but I think that whole movement to a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, is still where we need to go, and that means having some way of tracking people's preferences and their behavior and be able to target opportunities to them. So like, just give you a great example, a lot of us use Constant Contact, and it does talk now to both of those providers and puts the data back into the database, which is great, but we still don't have the capability that for-profit companies do with their software, being able to have hyperlinks that not only can people click on it, but it actually tags the member because of what they clicked on and puts that back in the database so that we can act more like Amazon and have a better idea of what people are attracted to so we can target them accordingly. And we're not quite there yet, but I hope that we'll be there, and who knows, maybe there'll be a different provider in the mix in the next few years that does come from the for-profit side. So not quite where I'd like them to be yet, but both of those I think are forerunners in terms of what we're using. I just think that as we change, the needs of the providers are going to have to change too.
Okay. This attendee asked this question. Our chamber does not see spikes or declines in membership, staying relatively stable. Our events and programs are always very well attended. For a situation like ours, would you recommend that we evaluate our due structure and offerings, or should this step only be taken for chambers that are experiencing declines in membership and participation? In other words, even if we're stable, should we be reevaluating to keep up with the trends?
I think in response to that last question, I would say the answer is yes. I don't think you should wait until you have a burning platform to make a change. I think if you're really a progressive chamber, then you would look at this as an opportunity every 2 or 3 years to really, bring together a team of members to really understand the different needs, and maybe the kinds of people that you should invite to talk to you are not necessarily those that are absolutely engaged, because I do believe if you looked at your membership, even though everything seems like it's going well and you have great retention and your programs are well attended, there's a good chance that you're still not attracting other people in the community. And remember, in the Whole Horizons initiative, it was really for us to think about diversity and inclusion. So think about who you're not seeing as a member, who's not engaging with you, and maybe bringing some of those people together to really understand why not. Because I really do think that most chambers tend to react and make changes when things start to go downhill. Wouldn't it be great if you did some kind of evaluation, made some tweaks? Maybe right now it's just your programming and an analysis of your benefits, and you don't necessarily need to change the dues model, but what you're doing is you're starting to get the feedback now so that as you do make some changes, you're going to have the right model in place. And maybe the current model just needs a few minor revisions. It doesn't need an overhaul.
Okay. Do you recommend Salesforce for a CRM or another provider, or any provider at all?
Yeah, some new ones that I'm familiar with Salesforce. There's another one called Blackbox. Microsoft Dynamics, I think, is starting to come into our world as well. Someday I really hope that we have a provider that's like Infusionsoft, and that's the software I use, but it's not an association software. It's a database marketing software, so it's Constant Contact and Amazon blended together. But having one that can not just keep the data in there. I think that's great. That allows for integration, that allows for all their technology to plug in and play so that we have compatibility between software. But keeping the data, but I think we've got to move towards really understanding who our customers are, what they want, how they behave, and then how do we start sending out targeted emails to them based on what they're interested in rather than an e-blast that goes to everybody. So I don't think Salesforce does that yet either, although Salesforce is probably closer to what we're talking about because it is a CRM, but we just need more marketing bells and whistles added to it.
Okay. This person notes that they calculate their dues for banks on assets. So most banks pay around $1,600. The concern is the loss in revenue if we switch to a different due structure such as tiered dues.
Yeah, what did they say? Yeah, what did she say that they're currently paying now?
They calculate their dues for banks on assets. So most banks pay around $1,600. $1,600, sorry.
Yeah, and you know, if you really think about that in $1,600, and you could engage them in a whole different way that's not really about assets, but really about, because banks are community builders. They have their corporate initiatives. I don't see why you couldn't put together a package for a bank whereby they would actually be giving you more than that. So I wouldn't worry so much about the assets. I would look more at how do you craft something that's really desirable for those members who are really looking for positioning in the community, being able to tell their story, being able to have more market share. How do people get to know us? I think there's a lot you can do in that space. It's not tied to assets, it's tied to their interests. And I think you could get more than $1,600.
Okay. Well, I think that we've reached the end of the questions that have been in the chat box, except for a question about the course itself. So the question is, how is it designed and how is it taken and how much does it cost? And I can start answering that, and Cathi, you can fill in anywhere you need to. It's an online course, and it's accessible. You can take a look at what is involved in the course and the modules by clicking on our ACC University webpage. There, I believe, are 5 modules. The cost, if you're a Horizon investor or you have a ACC All Access Pass, it's included, so it's complimentary. Otherwise, the price varies with your membership type. And it's on, as I said, it's online. There are also some additional links and information resources that you can download. And it's available for 1 year, once purchased for 1 year, 24/7, any member of your staff. So Cathi, do you have any other thoughts on what's included in the course or anything, any final thoughts at all?
I think what the course will do is really spur some great conversation between the staff and your volunteers, if you include them. I think it's the beginning. I don't think it's the end. It certainly is going to get you started and get you thinking. And my hope then is that, you know, people are going to have those great conversations and start to put some new thoughts together for a model. But it's not going to tell you exactly what to do, like, you know, do these 10 things and then you're done. I think if anything, it starts to shape the direction you're going in and helping you to make decisions. And I think every model that a chamber creates is really designed for that chamber. It's not necessarily meant to be replicated and work across the board for all chambers. And so I think you have to keep that in mind. But at the same time, I think it's going to give you the kinds of tools that you need to start preparing for a redesign.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cathi, so much for sharing your expertise and your experience and thoughts on all of these new trends. And thank you, all of you, for your great participation and very thoughtful questions. This has really been enjoyable, and I appreciate all of your participation. And Cathi, thank you again for lending your expertise. Just a reminder that we've recorded this webinar, and it will be available on our ACC webinar page, and you should look for it early next week. It'll be posted there. So I think that's it. Thank you again, all of you, and I hope all of you have a wonderful afternoon.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.